My name is Nora, and at 34 years old, I never thought I would be a widow. Just 3 months ago, I lost Ethan, my husband of 11 years, to a sudden aneurysm. Only a few days after his funeral, I forced myself to attend my nephew Noah's first birthday party, where my sister Sienna dropped a shocking revelation. She announced that Noah was actually Ethan's child, and she even presented a will that supposedly entitled her son to half of my $800,000 home. What she didn't realize was the reason I could barely hold back my laughter. If you know what it's like to live through family drama, take a moment to like and subscribe, because you'll want to hear how I responded to this. Ethan and I had met 12 years ago at a charity auction supporting children with cancer. I was volunteering that night, helping arrange the silent auction tables, while he ended up outbidding everyone for a painting I had been admiring. It was a watercolor of the Boston skyline at sunset, with vivid shades of orange and purple melting into the harbor. After winning, Ethan walked straight to me, handed over the painting, and with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his blue eyes, told me he had seen me staring at it all evening. He thought it should be mine. That was Ethan, kind, observant, and generous in ways most people aren't. I fell for him almost immediately. The very next night we went on our first date, and it felt as if we had known each other forever. Ethan was a corporate attorney, smart, grounded, and respectful. He never treated people like background characters. He remembered waitstaff by name and asked about their lives. 8 months after we met, he proposed to me on the harbor, with the skyline itself mirroring the painting that had brought us together. After our first anniversary, we bought a Victorian house in Beacon Hill. The price tag was $800,000, a stretch for us at the time, but Ethan had just become a partner at his law firm, and I was gaining traction as an interior designer. The house needed work, but it had soaring ceilings, sturdy bones, and a little garden where I once pictured our children playing. Those children never came, despite how much we tried. We spent years tracking cycles, seeing specialists, enduring tests and treatments. For exhausting rounds of IVF drained both our savings and our hope. I will never forget that final attempt, the heavy silence in the car on the way home. Ethan reached for my hand, and though neither of us spoke, we both understood it was the end of that path. Later that evening, on our porch swing, he told me softly that we could still have a wonderful life, just the two of us, and he truly meant it. From then on, we shifted our dreams. We traveled together, poured energy into our careers, and renovated our house room by room until it looked like the home I had always imagined. When I decided to start my own design business, Ethan was my greatest supporter. Our life was different from the one we had once pictured, but it was still full. My younger sister, Sienna, was always on the sidelines of our happiness. For years younger than me, just 30 at the time, she had always been the reckless one. While I focused on design and built a career, she drifted from one job to another and one relationship to the next. Our parents worried constantly and repeatedly stepped in to rescue her from financial or personal messes. The truth is, my relationship with Sienna had always been complicated. She was stunning and had an easy charm that drew people in, but underneath was a competitive streak. If I accomplished something, she felt the need to outdo me. When I began dating Ethan, she suddenly had an interest in law students. When we bought our home, she spent months griping about her apartment and hinting that our parents should help her move up. It was exhausting. Still, Ethan reminded me she was my only sister and that family should not be abandoned. 2 years ago, Sienna began dating Caleb, a bartender with tattooed arms and a motorcycle that our parents instantly disliked. Their relationship was intense but unstable, loud breakups followed by equally passionate reunions. Then, at Thanksgiving the year before Ethan passed away, Sienna surprised everyone by announcing her pregnancy. It was shocking. She had never seemed interested in children. In fact, she had often mocked me for wanting them, calling it caving to expectations. Yet there she was, crying dramatically and declaring her baby a miracle. The sting of jealousy was sharp. After all of our struggles, she had achieved accidentally what we had desperately wanted. Still, I swallowed those feelings, determined instead to be a loving aunt. Noah arrived healthy, weighing 8 pounds and 4 ounces. I brought flowers to the hospital and gave her the handmade blanket I had knitted for months. Sienna seemed overwhelmed by motherhood almost immediately, calling me often in tears over his colic or her exhaustion. I stepped in when I could, even taking him overnight so she could rest. Ethan stayed more distant. Looking back, I assumed it was because of our own struggles with infertility, that perhaps bonding with another child was painful for him. He was polite and gentle whenever Sienna brought Noah over, but he never got too close. I didn't question it then. And then came that Tuesday that destroyed everything. Ethan complained of a headache before leaving for work. I urged him to stay home, but he insisted it was just a migraine and that he couldn't miss an important client meeting. He kissed me goodbye and promised to call. That call never came. Instead, the phone rang from the hospital. By the time I got there, it was already too late. The doctors said it was a brain aneurysm, sudden and impossible to prevent. Ethan was only 36 years old. The following days passed in a haze of grief and endless arrangements. Sienna was strangely absent for most of it, sending excuses about Noah being sick or not having childcare. When she finally appeared at the funeral, she stayed only briefly, kept to herself, and slipped away before the reception was over. I was too overwhelmed with grief at the time to think much about Sienna's absence. Just 1 week after we laid Ethan to rest, Noah's first birthday came around. The last thing I wanted was to show up at a child's party, but family duty weighed heavily. Ethan would want you there, my mother reminded me during one of her daily calls. He had always said, family comes first. So I drove to Sienna's modest rental home in a rougher part of town. On the passenger seat sat a wrapped gift, and in the mirror I saw the dark circles beneath my eyes that no makeup could cover. Since Ethan's death, sleep had abandoned me. Night after night, I stared at his empty side of the bed, reaching for a warmth that no longer existed. I parked behind a line of cars, drew several steadying breaths, and finally picked up the gift. No one should have to fake happiness so soon after losing a spouse, I thought, but I forced on a smile and knocked at the door. Sienna's friend, Haley, answered. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Oh, Nora, you came," she said, her tone oddly tight. She glanced behind her before stepping aside. "Everyone's out back." Inside, the little house was decorated with blue balloons and streamers. A banner stretched across the living room wall, reading "Happy First Birthday, Noah." In the kitchen, a small group of people I didn't recognize were whispering, their voices cutting off the moment I passed. Their eyes followed me until I stepped outside. The backyard was filled with guests holding plastic cups, gathered in uneasy clusters. At a picnic table, I spotted my parents sitting stiffly. My father's face lit with relief as he rose to hug me. "Nora, we weren't sure you would come," he said warmly. "Of course I came," I answered, placing the gift on the table set aside for presents. "Where's the birthday boy?" "With Sienna," my mother said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "They'll be out soon for the cake." I drifted among the guests, awkwardly deflecting condolences and answering polite questions about how I was holding up. Every conversation seemed to break off when I approached. I assumed people just didn't know how to behave around a new widow. Half an hour crawled by before Sienna appeared, Noah perched on her hip. She wore a new dress I hadn't seen before, her hair freshly highlighted. Noah looked adorable in a little button-up shirt and bow tie, his chubby legs kicking excitedly at all the attention. Sienna hardly acknowledged me as she settled him in his high chair. She seemed almost radiant, buzzing with a strange confidence. Tapping a plastic spoon against her cup, she called for quiet. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Noah's special day," she began, her voice carrying across the yard. "This past year has been full of surprises and challenges, as many of you know." Guests exchanged uneasy looks. My mother stared down at her shoes. "I've been keeping a secret," Sienna continued, placing her hand gently on Noah's head. "One I can no longer hide, especially after recent events." A chill crept down my spine. Something was off. "Noah is not Caleb's son," she declared, her eyes locking onto mine. "He is Ethan's." Time seemed to stop. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father stiffened beside me, but I could only hear the rush of blood in my ears. Nora's husband and I had a brief affair 2 years ago, Sienna went on, her tone rehearsed and steady. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness for both of us. We never meant to hurt anyone, but sometimes these things happen. I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. My sister was claiming she had slept with my husband and that the nephew I had cherished was actually Ethan's child. The idea was so outrageous that a laugh almost escaped me. But Sienna wasn't done. She pulled a folded document from her purse. Ethan knew the truth about Noah, she said firmly. Before he died, he updated his will. She held it aloft. He wanted his son to be provided for. This will states that half the house Ethan and Nora owned should go to Noah, his biological child. Every gaze turned toward me. Faces held pity, shock, and morbid curiosity. My parents looked devastated, my father half rising as if unsure whether to intervene. And to my own surprise, I felt a smile tug at my lips. Not of joy, but the kind you wear when something is so absurd it borders on comical. I pressed my lips together, trying to contain the laughter bubbling inside. "Oh, I see," I said evenly, taking a sip of water to buy a moment. "May I look at this will, Sienna?" Her confidence wavered. She hadn't expected me to stay so calm. Slowly, she handed over the paper. It was a typed page with Ethan's supposed signature at the bottom. I scanned it quickly. The wording was wrong, completely unlike the legal documents Ethan often brought home. And the signature, though similar, was a poor imitation. The connecting line between the A and D was off, the flourish at the end exaggerated. I folded the page carefully and returned it to her. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I think I need to leave now." "That's it?" Sienna asked, her confusion plain. "You're not going to say anything else?" "Not right now," I replied calmly, picking up my purse. "This is Noah's day. We can talk privately later." I hugged my stunned parents, promising to call soon, then walked toward my car as hushed murmurs spread behind me. The party atmosphere had collapsed entirely. Once I slid into my car out of sight, the laughter finally broke free. At first it was small, then it grew until tears streamed down my face. These were not tears of joy, but a strange mix of grief, anger, and utter disbelief at my sister's audacity. Because there was something Sienna could never have known. Something Ethan and I had kept completely private. Something that made her carefully crafted lie not only cruel but impossible. The truth about Ethan and Sienna began 3 years before, well before Noah was ever conceived. We had invited her to dinner to celebrate her new job at a marketing firm, her longest stretch of steady employment at that point. Ethan cooked his famous lasagna, we opened a good bottle of wine, and for a while the evening felt warm and pleasant. Then a client called me with a design emergency, and I excused myself. 20 minutes passed while I talked a wealthy customer through the proper way to hang artwork. When I returned, the atmosphere had shifted. Ethan looked uneasy, and Sienna had slid closer to him at the table, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at something I hadn't heard. I brushed it off. Sienna had always been tactile, and there had been plenty of wine. But later that night, as we got ready for bed, Ethan seemed troubled. He sat on the edge of the mattress and told me there was something I needed to know. He didn't want to keep secrets, even though he feared it might cause conflict with my sister. While I had been on the call, Sienna had made a pass at him, not dramatic, but inappropriate. She had commented that he was too good for me, that he deserved someone who could truly appreciate him. When Ethan pushed back, she laughed it off as a joke and accused him of being too sensitive. I was hurt, but I wasn't entirely surprised. Sienna had always liked testing boundaries. We chose to let it go, blaming wine and her competitive streak. But it didn't stop there. In the months that followed, Sienna continued to cross lines, finding excuses to touch him when I wasn't looking, sending texts that were too flirtatious to be innocent, even once showing up at his office uninvited to ask him out to lunch. Every time, Ethan shut her down gently but firmly, and he told me immediately afterward. After the office incident, we finally confronted my parents. It went terribly. They insisted Ethan had misunderstood, that Sienna was just being friendly, that she only looked up to him as a brother figure. My mother even suggested, with good intentions but poor judgment, that perhaps Ethan felt flattered and was exaggerating. That night, Ethan and I agreed on a new approach. We would put distance between ourselves and Sienna without igniting a family war. We declined invitations that included her, made sure she was never alone with either of us, and Ethan blocked her number after one late-night message crossed the line. Then came the medical issue that changed everything. Ethan had been experiencing pain for weeks before finally seeing a urologist. The diagnosis was a varicocele, enlarged veins that required surgery. The procedure itself went smoothly, but the doctor strongly recommended adding a vasectomy at the same time due to the severity of the condition and the likelihood of recurrence. It was not an easy choice, especially after our long fertility struggles, but we decided it was the right path for his health. The vasectomy was performed 2 full years before Noah was conceived. No one else knew this, not even our parents. After years of invasive questions about why we didn't have children, Ethan and I had learned to protect our privacy. The only people aware of the surgery were Ethan, his doctors, and me. I remember Ethan recovering in the garden, sitting with an ice pack hidden under a towel. "Sienna isn't done," he warned. "I have a feeling she'll try something more drastic one day." I laughed it off then, but Ethan was serious. The very next week, he scheduled an appointment with our attorney, Ortiz Hale. I went with him as Ethan explained Sienna's behavior and his medical procedure in detail. Ortiz advised us to document everything: Sienna's unwanted advances, Ethan's medical records, the suggestive texts and emails. "You never know what might become relevant," he said. "Better to have it and not need it than the other way around." We followed his advice. We built a file of every piece of evidence. Ethan also updated his will through proper legal channels, leaving everything to me if he died. Ortiz kept official copies, and we placed the originals in a safety deposit box at the bank. "Just in case," Ethan had said as we locked it. Then, with a smile, he added, "Though I plan to be around at least 50 more years to deal with Sienna myself." The morning after Noah's birthday party, I drove straight to the bank. The manager, who had known us for years, expressed his condolences before leading me to the vault. Alone in the small viewing room, I opened the box Ethan and I had half-jokingly called our disaster preparation kit. Inside was everything I needed: Ethan's legitimate will, notarized and properly executed, leaving everything to me. His medical records clearly showing the vasectomy, making it biologically impossible for him to have fathered Noah. A journal Ethan had kept, recording every unwanted encounter with Sienna, complete with dates, times, and exact words. Printed copies of her suggestive texts. A letter from Ortiz Hale verifying he had overseen Ethan's will and was available to confirm its validity. And at the bottom of the box lay a sealed envelope with my name written in Ethan's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My dearest Nora," it began, "if you are reading this, something has happened to me and you have needed to open this box. I hope it is many years from now, when we are old and gray and Sienna's antics are nothing but a distant memory we laugh about. But if not, if the worst has happened and she has tried to harm you in my absence, please know that I prepared for every possibility. Use these documents to protect yourself. I know how much you value family, how fiercely loyal you are to those you love. But you also deserve to be shielded from anyone who would exploit that generous heart of yours. I love you beyond words, beyond time. Whatever happens, hold on to that. Ethan." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read, feeling his love reach me even from beyond the grave. My practical, steady husband had anticipated something like this, not necessarily Sienna's exact scheme, but the chance she might use his death for her own gain. I carefully returned most of the contents to the safety deposit box, keeping only what I needed: copies of the medical records, the legitimate will, and selected entries from Ethan's journal. Then I called Ortiz Hale and arranged to meet him that same afternoon. Ortiz's office was in a converted brownstone in downtown Boston, a place that radiated both wealth and discretion. I had only been there a few times with Ethan, but the receptionist remembered me instantly, her expression softening with sympathy. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, rising to greet me. "Mr. Hale is expecting you. Please accept my condolences." Ortiz was in his 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses balanced on the end of his nose. He had once been Ethan's mentor, and even after Ethan moved to another firm, they had stayed close friends. When I entered, he stood, came around the desk, and embraced me briefly. "Nora," he said gently, motioning for me to sit. I was devastated to hear about Ethan. He was one of the good ones. He was, I managed, my voice catching. And it turns out he was also right about preparing for the worst with my sister. I explained what had happened at the birthday party and handed him the forged will Sienna had presented. Ortiz studied it, his frown deepening. "This is an amateur forgery," he said at last. "The phrasing is off, and while the signature looks similar, it would never pass under real scrutiny. But the fact she created this at all is disturbing." I showed him the documents from the safety deposit box, the medical records confirming Ethan's vasectomy, the legitimate notarized will, and the journal where Ethan had documented Sienna's behavior. "Ethan was nothing if not thorough," Ortiz murmured, reviewing everything. "These medical records alone destroy her claim. The vasectomy was performed 2 years before Noah was conceived. Biologically, Ethan could not be the father." "What should I do?" I asked quietly. "I don't want to humiliate her publicly, but I also can't let her steal half our home with a lie." Ortiz leaned back, thoughtful. "First, we need more information. I suspect there's a deeper motivation. People rarely go this far without financial desperation. I recommend we bring in a private investigator." He suggested Paul Kearney, a former police detective now working with the firm. I agreed, and Ortiz called him immediately. An hour later, Paul arrived, a stocky man with a Boston accent and a no-nonsense air. He listened carefully as I laid out the situation, taking notes and asking pointed questions about Sienna's history, her work, and her finances. That was when I realized how little I actually knew about her current life. Since Noah's birth, we had only drifted further apart, my offers of help often brushed off or taken for granted. "I'll need a few days," Paul said once I finished. "I'll focus on her financial situation and the status of the child's real father." "Do you know anything about him?" I told him what little I knew of Caleb, the bartender Sienna had been seeing when she got pregnant. I had met him only a handful of times. He never seemed interested in family gatherings, and the last I heard, they were still together, though she rarely mentioned him anymore. I added that he hadn't been at the birthday party, which struck me as odd for the father of the guest of honor. Paul nodded, jotting it down. "That's a good starting point. I'll be in touch." 3 days later, he called and asked me to meet him at Ortiz's office. When I arrived, both men were waiting with documents spread across the conference table. "Mrs. Whitfield," Paul began once we sat down, "I've uncovered some troubling information about your sister." According to his report, Sienna was drowning in debt, over $75,000 spread across credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills from Noah's heart surgery shortly after birth. Her credit score was abysmal, and she had been denied 3 new loans in just the past month. "She's also facing eviction," Paul added, sliding a paper toward me. "This is a copy of the notice her landlord filed last week. She has until the end of the month to pay 4 months of back rent or leave the property." As for Caleb, he had walked away soon after Noah was born, moving to Seattle with a new girlfriend. His child support was minimal, barely $200 a month, and even that came irregularly. "I also found these," Paul said, producing printouts of text messages. "She's been planning to go after your house for weeks." The texts were between Sienna and her friend Haley, the same woman who had opened the door at the party. They were damning. "Ethan's death is awful, but maybe this is finally my chance to get what I deserve. That house has to be worth at least $800,000 now. If I play this right, I'll have a nest egg for Noah and me. The will is almost ready. My friend Mark is good with Photoshop," Sienna had texted, and he found a sample of Ethan's signature online from a charity auction. "It looks completely legit. Nora has always been the golden child. Time for me to get my share. She got 11 years with a great guy. The least she can do now is share the wealth." My stomach churned as I read her words. This wasn't desperation spoken in the heat of grief. It was calculated, cold, and deliberate, an act of premeditated fraud aimed at exploiting Ethan's death. "There's more," Paul said quietly. He explained that a background check on Caleb Ortiz, Noah's biological father, revealed a troubling history. Caleb had past charges of domestic violence from another relationship and an active warrant in New Hampshire for unpaid child support for a different child. "He's not the kind of man you want anywhere near your nephew," Paul added. I sat in silence, stunned. My sister wasn't just desperate, she was willing to drag Ethan's name through the mud, stain our marriage, and put her own child at risk if it meant solving her financial troubles. "What do I even do with all of this?" I finally asked, looking between Ortiz and Paul. Ortiz took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You have options. One is to pursue charges for fraud and forgery. Given the amount of money at stake, she could face criminal penalties, even prison time. Or," he continued after seeing my hesitation, "you could take a private route, confront her with the evidence, demand she retract her claims, and create an arrangement that protects you and, importantly, Noah." I left the office with a heavy folder of evidence and a heavier heart. That night, I called my therapist, Dr. Mira Zhao, and booked an emergency session. In her calm, plant-filled office, I poured out everything. "I'm so angry I can barely think straight," I confessed. "But Noah is innocent in all this. He's just a baby. And Sienna, as awful as she is, she's still my sister." Dr. Zhao listened closely, asking gentle questions about my lifelong relationship with Sienna. "It sounds like this dynamic of competition and manipulation has been present since childhood," she observed. "What you're experiencing now is not an exception, but an escalation. Compassion doesn't mean letting yourself be victimized. You can care about her while still setting firm boundaries and consequences." After hours of reflection, I knew what I had to do. I would confront Sienna privately. She could either face legal consequences for her lies, or she could accept a compromise, one that ensured Noah's needs were met but held her accountable. The next morning, I called her. "We need to talk about the will," I said evenly. "Come to my house tomorrow afternoon." "Alone. Leave Noah at home." "I knew you'd come around," she replied smugly. "I'll be there at 2. The following day, I prepared the living room meticulously. Documents were arranged in order. A recorder sat on the coffee table beside water glasses. On Ortiz's advice, I planned to request her consent to record. Massachusetts required both parties' agreement, and it would protect me. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I steadied myself before opening it. Sienna stood on the porch in a new outfit, her confidence radiating. "Come in," I said, leading her into the living room where 2 chairs faced each other. "I hope you don't mind if we record our conversation. It's wise, given the legal nature of what we're discussing." She hesitated briefly, then shrugged. "Sure. Whatever makes you comfortable. But really, this should be simple. The will is clear." I turned on the recorder, stated the date and time, and confirmed her consent. Then I leaned back and studied her carefully. "Before we get to the will, I'd like to hear, in your own words, exactly what you're claiming happened between you and Ethan." She launched into a polished, practiced story. According to her, she and Ethan began an affair 2 years earlier, during what she called a rough patch in my marriage. She claimed they met at a downtown hotel multiple times, that Ethan had confessed his unhappiness, and that Noah was conceived during those encounters. "He always meant to tell you," she said solemnly. "But when Noah was born with a heart condition, he didn't want to add more stress. He promised he would provide for his son." I let her finish, then calmly asked questions. "Which hotel?" "The Mandarin Oriental," she replied quickly. "And the room number?" She faltered. "It was high up. I don't remember the exact number." "What days of the week did you usually meet?" "Tuesdays. Sometimes Thursdays." "And what did Ethan usually order from room service? Which side of the bed did he sleep on? Did he shower before or after?" I pressed, adding more and more specific details, things only someone who had truly been with Ethan would know. Her face flushed. She stumbled over her answers, growing vague, even contradictory. Finally, she snapped, "Why does any of that matter? The point is Noah is Ethan's son, and the will proves it." Actually, I said quietly, opening the folder, both of those claims are demonstrably false. I placed Ethan's medical records on the table between us. 2 years before Noah was conceived, Ethan underwent surgery for a varicocele. At the same time, he had a vasectomy. It was entirely successful, confirmed by follow-up tests. Biologically, it was impossible for Ethan to be Noah's father. It was physically impossible for Ethan to father a child after that procedure. Sienna's face went pale as she picked up the medical records, her hands trembling while she scanned the clinical language and dates. "These could be faked," she whispered weakly. "They're not," I replied firmly. "And Ethan's doctor is prepared to testify to their authenticity if necessary. But that's only the beginning." I placed another document on the table, the legitimate will, notarized and properly filed with the court. This is Ethan's actual will, prepared by Ortiz Hale and witnessed by 2 of his partners. As you can see, it leaves everything to me. There is no mention of Noah. Her confidence cracked further, though she tried to recover. "He must have changed it later. The one I have is more recent." "The one you have," I said evenly, "is a forgery. A sloppy one at that." Ortiz has already identified multiple legal inconsistencies in the wording, and the signature is clearly fake. Forging a will is a felony in Massachusetts, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. I continued methodically, presenting the rest of the evidence: Ethan's journal entries documenting her advances, the text messages between her and Haley outlining their plan, and Paul's report detailing her debts, the eviction notice, and Caleb's abandonment. "We know everything, Sienna," I said, my voice steady. "The question is what happens next." For a long time, she sat frozen, silent. Then, to my surprise, she broke down. Not the dramatic tears she had often used to manipulate our parents, but real, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. "I didn't know what else to do," she gasped between tears. "I'm about to be homeless. Noah and I will be out on the street in 2 weeks. Caleb left us with nothing. The medical bills keep piling up. I thought if I could just get something from the house." "So you decided to ruin Ethan's reputation?" I cut in sharply. "To tell people he cheated on me? To forge legal documents?" I was desperate, she shouted, her grief flaring into anger. "You have everything. This big house, a thriving business, everyone's respect. What do I have? A sick baby, $75,000 in debt, and an eviction notice. You try making good choices in that situation." Her outburst hung in the air, raw and stripped of manipulation. For the first time, there was something honest in her words. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "So Noah is Caleb's son, not Ethan's?" I asked quietly. She nodded, wiping her swollen eyes. "Yes. Ethan never touched me. Not like that. I tried with him years ago, but he shut me down every single time. He was annoyingly loyal to you. As for the will, my friend Mark helped me make it. He's in graphic design and thought it would be easy to fake a signature. I plan to use it to pressure you into giving me money." "I never thought you'd actually investigate it so thoroughly." I switched off the recorder and leaned back. Sienna stared at me nervously, bracing for the worst. "I could press charges," I said after a pause. "What you did was illegal, cruel, and calculated." "I know," she admitted miserably. "But that would hurt Noah," I continued. "And despite everything, he's my nephew. I love him." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell the truth. You'll admit publicly that you lied about the affair, that Noah is not Ethan's son, and that you forged the will. You will apologize to me and to Ethan's memory." "And then what?" she whispered. "We'll still be evicted." "I'm not finished," I said firmly. "In exchange for your confession and a legally binding agreement never to attempt anything like this again, I'll help you and Noah. Not by giving you half my house, but by setting up a trust for Noah's education and medical care and helping you secure stable housing." Her eyes widened. "Why would you do that after everything I've done?" "Not for you," I said honestly. "For Noah. And because Ethan would want me to protect his nephew, even if his mother tried to destroy his name. But there will be conditions. You'll attend therapy and financial counseling. You'll keep steady employment. And you'll let me be part of Noah's life to make sure he's cared for. If you break any of this, the help ends immediately. Sienna sat in silence, absorbing my words. I don't deserve your help, she finally whispered. No, I agreed. You don't. But Noah deserves stability. And I deserve for Ethan's memory to remain untarnished. This solution gives both of us what we need. After more discussion, she agreed. We would meet with Ortiz the next day to formalize the agreement, and she would make her public confession at a family dinner the following weekend. As I walked her to the door, she hesitated. I really am sorry, Nora. I've been jealous of you my whole life. Everything always seemed so easy for you. Nothing about my life has been easy, I said quietly. You just never bothered to look past the surface. Maybe it's time you started. The family dinner I arranged for Saturday night was tense from the beginning. My parents arrived early, my mother carrying her signature lasagna as if it were a peace offering. I don't know what this is about, she said as she set the dish down on the counter. But Sienna has been calling us in tears, saying you're forcing her into some kind of family meeting. Just wait until everyone is here, I replied, pouring her a glass of wine. This needs to be dealt with once, with everyone present. By 7 o'clock, we were all seated around my dining room table, my parents, Sienna without Noah, who was with a babysitter, and me. Ortiz had advised me to record the family conversation as well, so a small recorder sat in the middle of the dining table. Thank you all for coming, I began, explaining the purpose of the recording. I've asked Sienna to share some important information with you. Sienna? My sister looked pale, her usual bravado gone. She stared down at her plate as she spoke in a barely audible voice. I lied about Noah being Ethan's son, she admitted. Ethan and I never had an affair. Noah is Caleb's child, and the will I showed at the party was forged. My parents froze, eyes wide. Why would you do something like that? My father demanded. Do you realize what that accusation did to your sister? To Ethan's reputation? Sienna explained her crushing debts, Caleb's abandonment, the eviction notice. Her words tumbled out with growing intensity. I watched as my mother's expression shifted from shock to sympathy. Oh, honey, she said when Sienna finished. Why didn't you just come to us for help? You didn't have to invent such terrible lies. Would you have given me $400,000? Sienna asked flatly. Because that's what I would have gotten if my plan had worked, half of Nora's house. Of course we couldn't give you that kind of money, my father said sternly. But we could have helped with rent, at least temporarily. Instead, you tried to defraud your own sister while she was mourning her husband. I know it was wrong, Sienna murmured. Nora made that painfully clear. She has enough evidence to press charges against me if she wanted to. My mother turned toward me, alarm flashing in her eyes. You wouldn't do that to your own sister, would you, Nora? Frustration surged through me at her instinctive defense of Sienna. I could, I said firmly. What Sienna did wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. Fraud and forgery are felonies. She's family, my mother insisted. And she has Noah to think about. I'm family too, I countered, my voice rising. Your daughter, the one who just lost her husband, then had to defend his memory from lies about infidelity. Where was your concern for me? My father shifted uncomfortably. Of course we care about you, Nora. But Sienna has always needed more guidance, more help. And whose fault is that? I snapped. You've been rescuing her from her mistakes her entire life. If you had let her face consequences, maybe she wouldn't have escalated to criminal behavior. My mother gasped. That's unfair, Nora. We always treated you both equally. To my surprise, Sienna shook her head. No, Mom, she's right. You didn't. You always made excuses for me, always covered my mistakes. It didn't help, it just taught me I could do whatever I wanted. My parents looked stunned at her admission. For the first time, Sienna wasn't deflecting, she was taking responsibility. So what happens now? My father asked cautiously. Is Sienna going to jail? No, I answered. I've chosen not to press charges on certain conditions. I outlined the agreement we had formalized with Ortiz, the trust fund for Noah, therapy and financial counseling for Sienna, and the requirement of steady employment. That's very generous, my father said with relief. Especially after what she did. It's more than generous, Sienna admitted softly. It's more than I deserve. Well then, My mother said with forced brightness. This has worked out for the best. Sienna has apologized, Nora is helping with Noah, and we can put this behind us. It's not that simple, Mom, I said firmly. Trust has been broken. Healing will take time if it happens at all. And there have to be boundaries. What kind of boundaries? She asked nervously. For one, you both need to stop enabling Sienna. No more bailouts, no more excuses. She needs real accountability, not more dependency. My father nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. And you need to respect that my relationship with Sienna has changed. I'll remain involved in Noah's life because I love him, but Sienna and I will not be close again, not for a long time, maybe never. My mother looked distressed. But we're family. We need to stay together, especially now. Being family doesn't mean tolerating abuse, I said gently. What Sienna did was abusive. She tried to manipulate me at my most vulnerable moment. That has consequences, even in a family. The rest of dinner was quiet, everyone weighed down by the new reality. When they left, my father hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Nora." Ethan would be too. My mother hugged me as well, her eyes sad, already grieving the family unity she had always pretended existed. Sienna was the last to go. At the door, she hesitated. "I really am sorry," she said softly. "Not just for the will and the lies, but for everything. For the jealousy, the competition, for not being the sister you deserved." "I know," I replied. "I hope therapy helps you understand why you made these choices. Noah deserves a mother who is healthy and honest." "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" she asked. I considered carefully. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But I'm willing to see where this new path leads for Noah's sake, and maybe one day for ours too." The drive home with my parents was silent, each of us lost in thought. One thing was certain, our family would never be the same. But maybe, with time, it could become something better, something built on honesty instead of illusion. 1 year after Ethan's death, I stood in our garden, watching spring bulbs push through the soil. The daffodils Ethan had planted the autumn before were blooming, a bright sea of yellow against the green lawn. A bittersweet ache filled me, knowing he had placed them in the earth hoping to see them flower. So much had changed in just 1 year. The trust fund for Noah was established and already covering his ongoing medical needs. His heart condition, while still requiring monitoring, was responding well to treatment, and he was blossoming into a cheerful, curious toddler. Sienna, to the surprise of everyone, had genuinely embraced the terms of our agreement. 6 months of therapy helped her recognize old patterns, the constant drive to compete with me, the self-sabotage that had defined so many of her choices. She had secured steady work as an office manager at a dental practice, a position that gave her stability and benefits she had never known before. Our relationship remained formal but civil. I saw Noah regularly, taking him on outings to the park or the children's museum. Sienna and I did not pretend to be close, but we had learned how to coexist peacefully for Noah's sake. My parents struggled the most with the new boundaries. My mother in particular had difficulty accepting that her daughters would not share the closeness she had always imagined. But in time, even they adjusted, slowly learning to support Sienna without enabling her dependency. As for me, a grief support group I joined shortly after Ethan's death had become a lifeline. 12 strangers bound together by loss grew into friends who understood me in ways even my family could not. We met weekly, sharing both setbacks and small victories, and lifting each other through the long process of grief. 3 months after the confrontation with Sienna, I founded the Ethan Whitfield Foundation for Legal Education. It provided scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to pursue corporate law. Watching Ethan's legacy live on through bright, determined young lawyers gave me a sense of purpose I desperately needed. Old friends showed up for me in ways I had never expected. Ethan's colleagues at the firm checked in regularly, inviting me to dinners and making sure I was not isolated. My college roommate Priya began flying in from Chicago once a month, just to spend weekends with me, even if all we did was order takeout and watch movies. And then there was Adrian. I met him at a fundraiser for the foundation, about 6 months after Ethan died. He was a professor of ethics at Boston University, kind, thoughtful, with a quiet humor that sometimes reminded me of Ethan. We began as friends, sharing coffee after meetings, then moved to occasional dinners. It was different than what I had with Ethan, as it should be. Adrian understood that Ethan would always be part of my story. He knew that loving again didn't mean replacing what came before. We were taking things slowly, cautious, but hopeful. That spring morning in the garden, surrounded by the daffodils Ethan had planted the autumn before, I thought of all the lessons he had left me. Not only from our years together, but even in the way he had prepared for what came after. His foresight had protected me when I was most vulnerable. His meticulous journal had validated my experiences with Sienna when my own parents had doubted me. His love continued to shield me, even in his absence. Through it all, I had learned painful but essential truths. That family ties only stay healthy with clear boundaries. That documentation is not just a legal safeguard, but sometimes an emotional lifeline. That forgiveness does not mean forgetting or tolerating harmful patterns. That sometimes, the people we expect to protect us are the very ones we need protection from. I had also discovered my own strength. I had faced betrayal, navigated legal complexities, and made choices that balanced compassion with accountability, all while mourning the man I loved. I had found ways to honor Ethan's memory while beginning to build a new life. The daffodils swayed in the spring breeze, resilient after the long winter. Grief, I realized, is like that too. It does not move in a straight line, it shifts with seasons, carrying both hardships and unexpected beauty. I was not the same person I had been before Ethan died or before Sienna's betrayal. Stronger in some ways, more guarded in others, but more authentic in how I lived and how I loved. Sometimes the most painful betrayals force us to find strength we never imagined we had. I whispered softly to the garden Ethan had loved, "You could not have known what would unfold after you were gone. But somehow, you prepared me to face it. Your love still protects me." As I turned to go inside, peace washed over me. Not because the grief was gone, it never would be, but because I had learned to carry it alongside hope. Ethan had given me that gift, the knowledge that love endures even when the person is no longer here, that preparation and honesty are profound acts of care. If I could share one truth with anyone facing betrayal within their family, it would be this: protect yourself with both documentation and boundaries. The people who truly love you will respect those boundaries. The ones who do not were never safe to begin with. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you navigate those painful conversations? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps me continue telling these difficult but important lessons. Thank you for listening. And remember, healing is never linear, but it is always possible.